Reserve Act was passed, floor of the House, where 3 members of Congress were on the floor. At that time, they only needed a majority of votes to pass it. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. 20 years later, 1933, under Roosevelt, the United States was declared bankrupt. And in 1933, the Federal Reserve private bank says, okay, USA, what are you going to pledge as collateral on the debt you owe me? What happened by 1936? Does anybody know? We instituted Social Security system, and you and I and our children and our children's children were pledged as collateral on the debt of our government to the Federal Reserve. Wow. And that's where we're at today. It took 20 years to make this country bankrupt, and since then, our government has operated under emergency powers of our government. It is not the president that makes the decision in this country. It's the Secretary of Treasury who turns around and is put in there by the Federal Reserve to manage the bankruptcy. We've been in bankruptcy ever since. So to print $700 billion and to give it away, how do they get away with it? The manager of the bankruptcy is told by the Federal Reserve this is the way to go. That's what
without warning. For the first year, the campaign was a spectacular success. Almost 1 million tons of shipping was sent to the bottom of the sea. Submarine panic swept the British fleet, with lookouts constantly claiming sightings of German U-boats. On May 7, 1915, the great Cunard ship Lusitania was passing off the coast of Ireland. Only days earlier, the luxurious ocean liner had left Southampton on its way to New York, but the ship would never arrive. A German submarine, the U-20, instructed in the shipyard of Danzig, attacked the Lusitania. The toll was high. Thousands grieved in the streets of London. Almost 1,200 people were killed, of which 128 were American. U.S. President Wilson threatened war, and the Germans backed down, promising not to sink passenger ships.
Weighing 27 metric tons, the Tsar bomber was so heavy it needed a specially modified plane to carry it to the release site. And it was on the 30th of October 1961 that the bomb was dropped from an altitude of 6.5 miles above a remote island in the Arctic Ocean. Because the device was so absurdly powerful, a parachute was deployed to slow its descent and allow the plane's crew time to escape from the blast. When the bomb was detonated, it released an energy yield equivalent to 50 million tons of TNT and created a gigantic fireball that was visible from 500 miles away. The bomb completely destroyed everything within a 22-mile radius and damaged windows in Norway and Finland some thousands of miles away.
Assalamu alaikum. Many other Americans have Muslims in their families or have lived in a Muslim majority country. I know because I am one of them. But my father came from a Kenyan family that includes generations of Muslims. As a boy, I spent several years in Indonesia and heard the call of the azan at the break of dawn.
Hillary Rodham Clinton, mystery woman, first Lady to be under criminal investigation inundated by scandals from Little Rock, Arkansas to Washington, D.C. The Clintons squeaked by Kenneth Starr's lengthy investigation into what is now known as the Whitewater scandal, a shady real estate deal the Clintons were never prosecuted for, although their associates were convicted of federal fraud and conspiracy charges. During the first year of Bill Clinton's tenure in the White House, they fired 7 employees with the White House Travel Office in order to reward their friends with jobs. Travelgate erupted, and the Clintons' personal lawyer and deputy White House counsel, a man Hillary regularly abused, supposedly committed suicide over having to testify, knowing full well all of Hillary's devious secret pathways to power. Hillary lied under oath to the Office of Independent Counsel, claiming the last time she spoke with Foster was before Father's Day, when in fact Vince Foster's assistant had seen her with Foster 4 times after that date. Patrick Knowlton, an eyewitness, saw men in red vests fleeing the area before Foster's body was discovered. Fast forward to today. Hillary's private emails were all transmitted on a private server registered to her home in Chappaqua, New York, while she was acting as a Secretary of State that oversaw the overthrow of Gaddafi, the Syrian civil war, the turmoil in Egypt, and the Benghazi scandal. Ironically, President Obama signed a law last November that requires government officials to direct their official correspondence through private email to a government account. Earlier today, Hillary gave a speech about women's rights at the United Nations. Hillary addressed her globalist New World Order cohorts from a room in the United States where press freedom is heavily restricted. She then traipsed out to face the music yet again, addressing her burgeoning career as a professional scandal creator by not initially addressing the subject at hand, instead acting presidential by speaking on the Iranian nuclear issue before launching into an orchestrated series of safe questions and even safer answers.
So even if you have a work-related device with a work-related .gov account, you choose what goes on that. That is the way our system works.
Earlier, her daughter Chelsea had announced that she might run for office, adding more loathing to the failed Clinton dynasty. We can expect Hillary the train wreck to announce that she is running for the highest executive position in the United States? Why in the hell would America vote for this entitled, disingenuous, double-dealing person
party
for
has
president?
lost its way because the conservative wing of the Republican Party always advocated a non-interventionist foreign policy. Senator Robert Taft didn't even want to be in NATO. George Bush won the election in year 2000 campaigning on a humble foreign policy, no nation building, no policing of the world. Republicans were elected to end the Korean War. The Republicans were elected to end the Vietnam War. There's a strong tradition of being anti-war in the Republican Party. It is the constitutional position. It is the advice of the founders to follow a non-interventionist foreign policy. Stay out of entangling alliances. Be friends with countries. Negotiate and talk with them and trade with them. Just think of the tremendous improvement relationships with Vietnam. We lost 60,000 men. We came home in defeat. Now we go over there and invest in Vietnam. So there's a lot of merit to the advice of the founders and following the Constitution. And my argument is that we shouldn't go to war so carelessly. When we do, the wars don't
just aren't
end.
in love with the dollar anymore. Dollar's down again today to its lowest in 4 months, heading for its 5th weekly decline. Our economics editor, Michael McKee, says the big move is a big deal indeed. Michael.
Well, at this point, you know, a strong dollar can be a good thing sometimes, but when it goes up as fast as our dollar did, that causes all sorts of problems. From July to the middle of March, the trade-weighted dollar went up 16%. We haven't seen a move like that in decades, and it had major impacts. It pushed down on inflation because we buy a lot of now cheaper imported stuff, really hit manufacturing because our stuff was more expensive to sell overseas, and you could see that in hiring only 4,000 manufacturing jobs, and of course it really hit corporate earnings. 40 to 45% of the S&P 500 get a lot of their profits from overseas. They all, I mean, how many companies did you guys report were saying the dollar hurt their earnings? GE said it cut earnings by $1 billion.
Currency translation.
Here's
right?
what here is one effect on stocks. Macrovision Research notes earnings yields on S&P tend to track changes in the CPI. You can see exactly what happens. The yield, the inverse of the price-earnings ratio, explains why earnings were lousy, but PEs are so high at this point.
All right, well, this is no surprise. Why don't companies hedge against it?
It's hard to do when you have so many different currencies you're dealing with, and our companies are so global
when the
at
dollar's
this point.
so volatile.
And when it goes up so fast, it took a lot of people by surprise.
And then comes down.
It's coming down now. Will it stay down?
But
That's
why,
the question.
right?
Well, oil prices going
Janet
back
Yellen
up
is
again.
trying to talk down the dollar a little bit, but she certainly can't be
That's not really it,
responsible
yeah.
for what we've seen.
Oil prices are going back up. That helps bring down the dollar. Yields are going up overseas, particularly in Germany. But basically, you can thank the economy Mohammed El-Arian was talking about. We got a tepid economy. You don't have to bet on the Fed raising rates a lot or sooner, and that has people figuring they don't need to make that trade. You're not as much in love with the dollar as you used to.
There we go.
All right,
Michael, thank you.
Nobody gives you the real deal better than Michael McKee.
Real estate should help protect you because it is something real, as long as you don't owe a lot on it. Because in a deflation, people's incomes go down and debt service becomes a lot harder. However, I do believe that gold will outperform real estate, probably by a long shot. And the countries where real estate is in the biggest bubble are the countries where real estate is going to correct most against gold. Europe, Russia, and the United States experienced their real estate bubbles popping back in 2008, and it was huge. Real estate went down a lot, and then it started to rebound and go back into a mini bubble. But other countries around the world, like Canada, Australia, and China, they just took a breath and then kept on running. I mean, their bubbles are enormous, and when there's the next time that there's a global crisis, the real estate is going to go down a lot more by percentage against gold, I believe, in those countries than in the countries where there's already been a partial correction. So for me, I want to wait until there's basically blood in the streets on real estate before buying
America has allegedly given aid worth more than $150 million to companies in Afghanistan that are suspected of links with terrorist organizations. The revelations come from an investigator who was specially appointed by the U.S. Congress. Guyane Chichikan takes up the story.
The U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction found out that the Pentagon has hired 43 companies with suspected ties to terrorist networks. The data comes from a construction firm, presumably owned by a leader of the Haqqani network. The network was blamed for an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Kabul that killed 16 people 2 years ago. The U.S. Army has carried out a classified investigation and said there was evidence of a direct role of both the company and its owners, quote, in the facilitation and operation of the Haqqani network, and that approximately from $1 to $2 million per month flows to Haqqani network to finance its activities. The Inspector General said, "I've seen the information, quote, and it made my hair stand on end," he said. Well, not just his.
The United States government subsidizing the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, the Haqqani network, those groups that are trying to shoot and kill our soldiers.
From the Inspector General, members of Congress have heard about billions of dollars simply wasted in Afghanistan. Now they have evidence suggesting that U.S. taxpayer money goes to finance terrorists or suspected terrorists, the same networks that the U.S. is fighting. Despite these findings, the Pentagon has resisted permanently blocking the companies from getting more U.S. contracts because its lawyers say they cannot use the evidence against these companies because the evidence is classified. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction pointed out what he called the absurdity of it. He said, "We can probably attack them via drone on Monday and we'll issue them a contract on Tuesday." In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chakyan, RT.